today I want to take a little time to talk about kids who are autistic and differences in development from neurotypical kids. My name is Cami. If you're new here, I am an autistic adult. My husband's autistic, and so are at least 4 of our 5 children. And in our family, we have a wide variety of different needs, and it's given me quite a bit of experience in the way different kids develop. So whether kids are neurotypical or neurodiverse or what, their development isn't always going to be linear. It's not always going to follow along a path of what is expected and typical. For a lot of kids, it will. A lot of kids will just continue to go on and fall into that range of what is considered normal, meeting the milestones when they're supposed to meet the milestones. But there are going to be kids that don't. There's going to be kids that fall behind and then jump ahead, and for a lot of those kids, they're going to end up being neurotypical, and they'll never have a diagnosis of any kind, and either lagging behind or jumping ahead won't really mean anything for them. It'll just be a little difference in development, a blip, if you will, in how they're developing. But for kids who are autistic and for other kids with neurological differences, you are more likely to see differences, major differences in development, and development that is going to fall far outside the range of what is considered typical. One example of this would be how Tessie still puts everything in her mouth. The other day I got a comment, and it was on a video that was mostly about Maggie, asking, so are you at least concerned about how she eats dirt? And Maggie doesn't eat dirt. Maggie puts her paintbrush up to her mouth all the time, so she often has paint on her face, which was the first thing I thought. So my response was, she doesn't eat dirt. I don't ever really remember her eating dirt. And then later on, after I responded, I thought to myself, oh, maybe he's talking about Tessie. Tessie is very much, at almost 4, still at the phase where everything goes up to her mouth like a baby. Probably because it's a stim, but also just because developmentally she has not yet left the phase where everything goes to her mouth. She got to that phase very late. When she wasn't doing it, it was concerning. So Tessie didn't put things in her mouth, including food, until she was over 18 months old, I believe. And she had tons of therapists trying to get her to try different foods. It was something we were working on. That was a concern, and it almost at one point landed her in the hospital, because at one point at 15 months we couldn't even get her to drink, and she was getting dehydrated because she didn't want to put things in her mouth other than her thumb. And at the time, I remember all of her therapists at that point, early interventionists, saying she will eventually go through the phase where she puts things in her mouth. All children do. I've never seen a child who doesn't go through that phase. And remembering Maggie with her binky and putting all of her toys up to her mouth, I remember saying I wouldn't really hate it if she skipped that phase. And of course, at around 18 to 24 months, it finally started. And now, a little over 2 years later, we're still in that phase. And of course, I'm always working with her on what's appropriate to put in her mouth. But she's a little kid, and it's kind of like having any other little kid outside. They are always getting into things, and I'm not going to keep her cooped up inside just because I have to work with her on things when we're outside. That's part of being a parent. So no, it doesn't concern me. But that got me thinking more. Is the concern the dirt and the germ aspect, or is the concern that this is a developmental delay? Because if you have a kid who's autistic, they might be ahead of their peers in some areas. They might be way behind their peers in other areas. They might be right on track. You don't really know what you're gonna get, and that's okay. We have a tendency to do things in our own time. One example I use is that Sadie had a hard time with reading initially, and she went from struggling with reading up until 3rd grade when she suddenly, almost overnight, it clicked and she started reading chapter books. And just like that, she went from hating reading because she had been trying to learn to read for 3 years, and it just didn't click. It just didn't click. We had bought every program. And then almost overnight, she was reading chapter books, and now she loves to read. If there's one thing that I have learned over this parenting adventure, it's that using a measurement meant for other children to measure kids who are autistic just isn't a great idea. Our kids will do the things that they're meant to do in their own time, and oftentimes in their own way. It's why when Patrick began having a hard time to read, I wasn't nearly as worried as I was with Sadie. And I didn't push nearly as hard because I knew that with Sadie I had pushed and pushed and pushed, and that it led to so many tears. And it didn't help her learn to read any faster. She was going to learn to read when her brain was ready for her to learn to read. And now, at a little over 7, Patrick's brain seems like it's pretty ready to learn to read. We've had a lot less tears over it than we had with Sadie, and that is thanks to experience. The other advice is advice that I would give to parents who are just getting reports back for the first time when they have a child who's had a diagnosis. I have gotten reports back that said, your child's functioning was in the lowest 0.05% of children on the autism spectrum. I've gotten reports back that said, your 18-month-old is functioning in the 0 to 6 month range. I've gotten multiple reports back. I know they're supposed to say levels now, but the only levels I've ever gotten were for me, Patrick, and Sadie. And Paul got his back with a level. We're all level 1. We've all been tested in the last year. For the girls, they still had functioning labels on their tests. So their tests said severe for our girls who were tested more in the past. And their test results were always harder, I guess. Harder to read. I guess the thing that I would tell parents, because a lot of times parents stumble upon this page when right after they've gotten a diagnosis, is that what's in those reports doesn't determine your child's future or their potential. It's a snapshot of what happened when they were in a room, usually a strange room, with a stranger and probably you for 1 hour of their life. And it doesn't tell you anything about their future. Developmentally, what your child is doing, especially if they're 2 or 3, no one can tell you right now what the future holds. So often people ask me what's going to happen to my 2 or 3-year-old, and I don't know, but I know that you are the best support for them, that they are in a world that is loud and overwhelming, in a world that isn't made for them. You can help them have a better experience in that world than they could have if you didn't have these answers. There are people in this world that will tell you that they are broken, that they can be cured or changed, but you're their parents and you know they aren't broken. They're exactly who they were meant to be. And it's your job to protect them because they are still little now. Even if they're older, they're still kids. It's your job to protect them from all this awareness that tells them that they're broken, that there's something wrong with them, because there's nothing wrong with them. They're just different. They're different than the typical person. Not worse, not better, just different. It's your job to help them be who they are supposed to be. Their development might not look like a typical kid, and you might have some struggles with communication. Even in our own house with 6 autistic people, it's not always easy figuring out how to communicate. There's not a rule book for this. It would probably be easier if there was, but I guess that's life. But if you can protect your child from the chaos and the pain of people who will try to convince them that they are broken, then that is an amazing start. If you can find ways to help them communicate on their terms, I can promise you that your life will be better for it too. We can support them, but trying to force them to be something that they aren't is really one of the biggest mistakes that we can make, and they will not thank us for that at all. That is it for today. If you like this video, we'd love it if you'd give it a thumbs up, and if you're interested in all things autism, we'd love it if you'd hit subscribe, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.